No one really knows who's going to win the Labour leadership contest, but certainly the big political surprise of the summer is that the man who's struggled to get enough MPs to nominate him is now being talked about as the frontrunner. Jeremy Corbyn has been attracting large crowds around the country and has come out top in 2 opinion polls by YouGov. But he's a controversial figure, and a number of veteran Labour politicians have expressed misgivings about his policies and rebellious voting record. In a moment, it's your chance to call and ask Jeremy Corbyn any question you like. The number is 03700 100 444. But first, here's our political correspondent Ian Watson on the state of play so far. And Ian, you've got new details about which unions have been most successful at signing up their members for this contest.
Yeah, that's right, Martha. Regular listeners will know, under Labour's new rules for electing their leader, trade unionists can get a vote without being fully paid up party members, so long as they sign up as affiliated supporters. Now, 189,000 have done so. That's around a third of the votes in this contest. And it now appears that the vast majority of them are members of unions which are supporting Jeremy Corbyn. The Unite Union alone accounts for a clear majority of these affiliated supporters, 110,000. And that union's leader, Len McCluskey, has written to all his members urging backing for Jeremy Corbyn first and foremost, with Andy Burnham as a second preference. And by contrast, the moderate shop workers union, USDAW, which gives outright backing to Andy Burnham and no backing whatsoever to Jeremy Corbyn, it's only signed up a tiny amount of its members for a vote, just 6,000 of them. Now, you can't assume, of course, members always follow their leader's advice, but union sources are estimating, that can only be a kind of wild estimate almost at this stage, but they're estimating perhaps half of them will go for Jeremy Corbyn, which would give him a very nice head start in this contest.
Now, as well as the trade union affiliated supporters, there's this new category, isn't it, of registered supporters. What do we know about them?
Yeah, that's right, Martha. There's 120,000 of them. They get a vote in return for paying just £3. Now, there's been lots of speculation that both those to the right of Labour politically and to the left have been trying to sign up as these new supporters, either to change the party's direction or as a laugh to saddle the party with a candidate they think is least electable. The former Conservative MP Matthew Parris, for example, says he's signed up his 3 llamas. Now, I've been told that at least one of the big unions, the GMB, warned precisely of this danger, not of the llamas, but of the infiltrators, and said the fee shouldn't just be £3, it should be £15 to £20, and that was rejected by the previous party leadership. Now, the party has taken on extra staff. It's now working 24 hours a day to try and verify these new members, checking they're on the electoral roll. But it doesn't have the resources to check that everyone who signs up has told the truth and that they support Labour's values. So for legal reasons, even if there is evidence from canvass returns at general elections that someone opposed Labour consistently, they can't automatically exclude them. They're so worried, in fact, about a legal challenge. They've taken Lord Faulkner, off Andy Burnham's campaign. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary, and he's now giving them robust legal advice. But in short, Martha, even if you've been consistently opposed to the Labour Party throughout, that wouldn't necessarily stop you voting in Labour's leadership contest.
Ian, thank you. Well, Jeremy Corbyn is here in the studio, but before he takes your calls, let's find out a little bit more about him. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
There's a Jeremy Corbyn shop on the left-winger's official campaign website. 10 beer mats for £3. Cheers, Jeremy, they say. Thanks for standing. So who is the candidate universally described only a matter of weeks ago as a rank outsider? Jeremy Corbyn is 66. He was born in Wiltshire, grew up in Shropshire and went to grammar school. Before being elected to Parliament, he worked for what was then the National Union of Public Employees and was a councillor in the London Borough of Haringey. He arrived at Westminster on the same day as Tony Blair back in 1983. He found himself arrested whilst campaigning against apartheid in South Africa, advocates nuclear disarmament, opposed the Iraq War and chairs the Stop the War coalition, and has faced questions about his closeness to Hamas and Hezbollah, Middle East groups prescribed entirely or in part by the British government as terrorist organisations, and the IRA. He doesn't own a car and likes poetry and his allotment. Jeremy Corbyn's website says he stands for straight-talking, honest politics. But it also says unity is our watchword, which says rather a lot about what his campaign has achieved. A huge debate within the Labour movement and often a rather acrimonious one. So much for being an outsider. Jeremy Corbyn, with his beard and vest, has been talked up as a sex symbol on Mumsnet, and he's the biggest name in politics this summer.
Thank you very much, Chris. And the man himself is here to answer your call. Welcome to the programme. And we're going to begin with a call from Danny Golding, who's ringing from York. And Danny, you've got a vote in this contest.
I have, yes.
So what's your question to Jeremy Corbyn?
Okay, Jeremy, it's good to be speaking to you, and I'm really pleased that you brought so much life and energy to this campaign. My question is this. Anyone who spent time campaigning in the marginal seats in the last election will have quickly found that voters were deserting Labour for the Tories and UKIP because they didn't trust us on immigration, on benefits, and particularly on the economy. John Cruddas, who was one of the MPs who nominated you, has been carrying out an inquiry which found that a lot of those voters thought we weren't offering enough austerity, not that we are offering too much austerity. So my question is, how do you think your policies will win back these voters and help us win victory in 2020?
Danny, thanks for your question. Excuse me, I've got a bad throat from all the campaigning. I spent some of the last election campaigning in marginals also, and I spent several days in Thanet campaigning there for our candidate, where Nigel Farage was trying to win the seat. And so obviously UKIP were a huge factor there. And it was very interesting that when one got to a discussion about education, about housing, about wage levels and jobs, a lot of people were very, very open to that. And I was making the point to them, as I make now, that austerity has brought about big cuts in public expenditure, has brought about considerable degrees of hardship for a lot of people, and that if we have a growing economy rather than an economy of cuts over the next 5 years, then we begin to be able to provide those services that are necessary for everybody else.
Danny, do you think that message would be convincing to the marginal voters in York?
Well, I think it could be, because...
I just want to bring Danny back in for a second.
Sorry, Danny, come on back.
York's a very safe seat. That message will go down well here. But I think the reality is in Thanet, if you take an example, Labour didn't win it. That was one of our target seats. It was won by the Conservatives. And in West Yorkshire, where I was campaigning, we lost a whole swathe of target seats because voters didn't feel that we were addressing their concerns about the economy. And my concern really, Jeremy, about your campaign is you don't seem to be reflecting back the very real kind of concerns that a lot of us were hearing on the doorstep.
Well, we were offering in the election, if we're honest about it, austerity light, when the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats were offering austerity heavy. So even if we had won the election in May, and I obviously wished we had, I worked very hard to try and achieve that, then we would now be making cuts in local government expenditure. We would now be dismissing civil servants. We would now be saying to many of the poorest and most vulnerable in this country that you have to join in paying the price of austerity. I think it was the lack of a clear alternative that was one of the problems. I'd also say to voters who may not themselves be in particular economic difficulties at the moment that they have older relatives, they know people who have mental health conditions, they know people who need public services, they also have children who are going to want somewhere to live in the future. So I think a coherent economic approach, which is about a growing and above all more equal economy, would actually resonate very well with many of those voters. And I've spent a lot of my life, obviously as a Member of Parliament, but before that I was an agent for the Labour Party in Hornsey, now Hornsey and Wood Green, and I fully understand the campaigning instincts and the need to get a message across that says to everybody, actually, a more equal society is good for all of us.
Good. Okay, thanks very much indeed for your call, Danny. Let's talk now to Sherry Hughes, who's calling from the Wirral.
Oh, hello, Jeremy.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for taking my question this afternoon. Jeremy, why do you call Hamas friends?
I was in a meeting in the House of Commons for a very serious discussion about the opportunities for peace in the Middle East, and I said to everyone in the room, welcome to all our friends here, let's have a discussion. I think the remark has been taken quite seriously out of context by a lot of people. Can I finish a moment? I have also met in the company of other members of Parliament Hamas whilst visiting Gaza, as indeed Tony Blair has met representatives of Hamas. Does it mean I agree with or approve of what Hamas says or does? No, it does not. What it does mean is that I think you have to have a discussion that includes Hamas if you're to bring about any kind of peace process.
That's clear. But let's let Sherry. I think she wanted to come back on that.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah,
Sherry, go ahead. Yes.
I absolutely understand as an old-style international socialist you believe in dialogue, Jeremy, as do I. However, I do not see why you need to extend that to the epithet of friend to an organisation that, according to Amnesty International, has carried out a brutal purge against fellow Palestinians in 2014, which amounts to war crimes. I mean, the list's endless. I could tell you so many things that Hamas are guilty of, currently executing barbers for cutting women's hair, or at least arresting them and potentially executing them, seeing as they seem to do that to people they have in custody and then accuse them of being collaborators. So I wonder why you felt the need to actually call them friends.
Okay, let's let Jeremy Corbyn answer that.
I can quite happily discuss things with people without terming them friends.
Okay.
The war crimes investigation of 2014 is about the whole totality of Operation Protective Edge, and also includes the behaviour of the Israeli Air Force and Israeli Army in the assault on Gaza, in which 1,500 people died, and so that war crimes investigation.
Before we get too much into the detail of all this, perhaps you could even address Sherry's main point, which is on the idea of calling them friends. Do you think that was a mistake? Is that something you'd like to withdraw?
I used it as a diplomatic language in a meeting. I have met elected representatives of Hamas in Gaza in the company of members of Parliament from 60 members of Parliament from all across Europe during one delegation between Operation Cast Lead and Operation Protective Edge. Does it mean that I consider the policies of Hamas appropriate and ones that I agree with? Absolutely, of course I don't. You know very well my views on the death penalty, my views on torture, my views on human rights issues. There are people who think that we can get a peace process by ignoring them. Sadly, that cannot be the case, and even the former head of Mossad is now saying it's time for Israel to have open discussions with Hamas. They've already had, how should I put it, proximity talks, including Hamas in Cairo, which brought about the welcome ceasefire at the end of Operation Protective Edge. But
I do want to move on because we've got a lot of people who want to talk to you.
Dialogue is essential if we're to bring about a long-term peace process.
Sherry.
And I look forward to the war crimes investigation, which will affect a lot of people in the region. And I said it's not just one-sided, it includes Israel as well.
Thank you very much indeed for your call, Sherry. Let's talk to Lee Barnett now, who's calling from Richmond. Are you a Labour member?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Mr. Corbyn.
Good afternoon, Lee.
I joined the Labour Party, my first political party, on the 8th of May at the age of 50.
Okay.
Since then,
Welcome.
I'm coming to think that I've made a mistake, especially when seeing online the anti-Semitic abuse and the Holocaust denial posted by those who say they're your supporters. Instead of merely suggesting the debate should be polite, why don't you tell those who post such material, I don't want your support. The Labour Party doesn't want you in it. You're loathsome people. Go away. You've loathsome views. I don't want to be elected on the votes of anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers. Because until you do, at best you ignore what's happening, and at worst you give the impression you actively condone it.
Lee, absolutely you do not condone it, and I think you know very well that I do not condone that in any way. I have spent my life as a campaigner against racism. My parents were campaigners against racism. My mother was there in Cable Street alongside the Jewish and Irish people opposing the rise of Nazism in Britain. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, far-right racism is totally wrong and absolutely obnoxious. And I've made that absolutely clear to everybody who will listen to me on this subject. And I'm sure you and I can agree that the strength of any community and society is respect for its diversity, respect for its multi-faith credentials, but above all, absolute opposition to racism and intolerance in any form that it arises.
Lee, thank you for your call, but there have been questions raised about the kind of people that you associate with. Story in the papers today about the fact that you invited Diane Abu Jarjar to the Commons as a special guest. Now, this is a man who's talked about hoax gas chambers.
Sorry, who?
You've not met him?
No. I saw the name this morning, and I asked somebody, who is he?
Right, so this was somebody who was reported today. Well, that's it. So you definitely didn't invite this man to the Commons as a special guest.
My views are that the Holocaust was the most disgraceful and vile process of the history of the 20th century, if not the wider world. And that has to be understood by successive generations and has to be understood by all our children in schools. That surely is important. The idea.
So just to be absolutely clear on this, but there's an accusation which I think you're denying. I'm giving you the opportunity to deny it.
The idea.
You didn't invite this man.
Can I answer, please? The idea that I'm some kind of racist or anti-Semitic person is beyond appalling, disgusting, and deeply offensive. I've spent my life opposing racism. Until my dying day, I will be opposed to racism in any form.
Okay, you've made that very clear. But on this particular accusation, which I'm sure you'll want to answer, you're saying you've not met this man. He's a Lebanese-born activist. He's now banned from the UK. He's someone who said that he considered every dead British soldier a victory. It's been reported that you invited him to the House of Commons as a special guest. Is that something you're denying?
I'm sorry, I don't know who this person is.
Okay, you've made that absolutely clear. Let's move on to our next caller now, and it's Marlon Minty who's ringing in from Reading.
Oh, hi. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, Marlon.
Before I go any further, just to say, me and my friends and family are very pleased to have someone running for the leadership who genuinely represents what the party should be standing for. But my question today is mainly to do with housing. And obviously, we're in a period of history where housing is having a massive boom and is worth a great deal of money. I just wanted to know how your in terms of financially, how you'd be looking to support people who are looking to buy a home, who don't necessarily have a family and are possibly looking to get something by themselves, but also without having to sell off social housing, as we've seen under the Right to Buy scheme supported by the Conservatives.
Thanks, Marlon. Housing is an issue that is very dear to my heart. I represent an inner city constituency, and housing is the hugest issue that I face in my constituency advice bureaus. In short, a number of issues. One, I want to ensure that central government either provides capital resources, support through a national investment bank, or borrowing opportunities for local authorities to build more council housing and build sufficient stock of council housing that single people, as well as many desperate families, can actually get somewhere to live, which is secure and a tenancy for lifetime. Secondly, that the private rented sector, which in some parts of Britain is now over a third of the entire community, has to be better regulated. There has to be longer-term tenancies. There has to be greater security of tenancy. There has to be an end to peremptory evictions. And I believe there has to be a limit on the rent levels that can be charged so it becomes affordable. Otherwise, we end up with effectively social cleansing of inner city areas of Britain, and not just in London, but other parts of the country as well.
Marlon,
I also understand the importance of people having the opportunity of somewhere to buy. I'm not in favour of selling off council or housing association stock. That is necessary for people in desperate housing need. I am in favour of a state-supported mortgage scheme for first-time buyers, particularly for young people, including single people, because that is the fastest growing household dynamic across the whole of the UK.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your call, Marlon. I want to move on to Neville Bann, who's calling from Liverpool. And I think in a related point about your economic policy, you've been a Labour member for some years. Neville.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Neville.
When interest rates can't be lowered anymore during a recession, a traditional Keynesian solution is to introduce quantitative easing as a last resort. Now, your policy has put the word people in front of it, so I'd like to know what you mean by that. But very, very importantly, is it only to be used during a recession, as Keynesians would argue?
No, we've put 325 billion in quantitative easing into the banks, which is labelled a loan, but in reality it's a loan that I don't expect the Bank of England to collect from the banks that have had those sums of money. What I'm suggesting, and it is a suggestion and a proposal that I hope will have a fuller economic commission to consider, is that some of that money be used to fund the establishment of a national investment bank, and that national investment bank would be be tasked with funding improved infrastructure, rail infrastructure particularly, would also be tasked with funding improved housing, and I mentioned that in answer to an earlier question, would also be tasked with funding things like improved broadband access across the whole of the UK, and also, crucially, investing where necessary and where appropriate in new high-skilled jobs in engineering and manufacturing industry, because we have far too great an imbalance between financial services and manufacturing in Britain. 80% of the workforce are now working in the service sector.
Well, let's
Most European countries have done far better on promoting manufacturing industry than we have. So
let's go back
there's a number of issues there.
Sure. Let's go back to Neville now. Do you think that that's convincing? Do you want to see quantitative easing being...
Because the specific question I asked Jeremy was, do you use quantitative easing when there's a recession, as it is normally used? Your advisor, Richard Murphy, has, from what I can see, has said both, sometimes during a recession and sometimes not. So that's the key question, because that's when it's been used in the past. Will you use it outside a recession? And then the argument is that will produce runaway inflation.
Well, I don't think it produces runaway inflation, because it depends how much you use. I would think that it's necessary and useful to use it so we actually have an expanding and growing economy. The outside of a recession at the moment, we're in a sort of period of, as you correctly point out, interest rate stagnation, but we also have huge infrastructure deficiencies in Britain, and we also have the combination of a skills shortage and underutilisation of many qualified people. So investment in an expanding economy is surely something that will benefit all of us, and that, of course, then in itself leads to increased tax income for the central government anyway.
There have been questions raised about whether this would, to a certain extent, undermine the credibility of the Bank of England, which would be carrying out the quantitative easing normally used to make the banking system work better or to support the currency, by expanding its role, although indirectly through another bank, into areas like housing. Could that cause a run on sterling?
Is it such a bad thing if the Bank of England is tasked with doing that as well? Because we do have serious lack of investment problems in Britain, particularly housing and infrastructure I mentioned, but they're not the only ones. I would have thought tasking the Bank of England with that level of responsibility would actually be a good thing. And so the National Investment Bank would be something they would establish, and that would kickstart this whole process.
OK, let's talk to Fiona Brown, who's calling from Tunbridge Wells in Kent. And you're someone else who's just rejoined the Labour Party this year.
I have indeed. This was actually before I'd really heard much about Jeremy, way back in March, after an absence following Iraq. So I'm glad to be back. I'm more than happy to have listened to a lot of what Jeremy has to say via a young person that I met at the CLP.
OK, we've not got too much time, so if I could press you to ask a question, that would be great.
OK, there's lots of us oldies, not just young people. So what we all want to know is what you're going to do when it comes to, you're going to have to deal with fairly soon, the European referendum, whether you're going to be behind Alan Johnson in his Yes campaign. OK, we got the gist. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, and the campaign is great because it involves people of all ages, and that's splendid. On the EU, I think we should be making demands now as a party to enhance and extend the social chapter in the European Union. We should also be looking at greater environmental protection and also challenging David Cameron in his wish to promote the free market in Europe and also to reduce the ability of people to move across Europe, the free movement of labour across Europe. And so I think we should be part of that debate and part of those demands at the present time.
Is that a clear enough answer for you?
So it's important that we actually be, as a party, part of that whole process, and so that we have a more democratic social solidarity across Europe than that which Cameron is proposing at the present time.
OK, one last quick call from Ellie Curran in Manchester. You're through to Jeremy Corbyn.
Hello. If you are elected leader and in a year or two there's strong evidence from local government elections, Labour Party door knocking and national polls that Labour's unlikely to win a majority at the next election under your leadership, would you stand down?
Well, we're a democratic party. We're going through the biggest democratic exercise that's ever been conducted by the Labour Party and probably any other party. 600,000 people are taking part. We don't yet know what the result's going to be, and obviously I'm looking forward to September the 12th, just like everybody else. And I want us to move might and main to actively oppose the Tories, the welfare reform bill, the budget, and the trade union legislation they're putting forward. And we are a democratic party, and everyone who's elected to office in the party has to be accountable, including the leader. So we will see what happens.
And just to be clear, because this question has come up in the campaign, do you yourself actually want to be Prime Minister?
Look, I put myself forward in this leadership contest knowing there was a difficulty getting on the ballot paper, and I'm grateful to colleagues that nominated me, genuinely so, even though they perhaps weren't so keen on the process. Okay,
sure.
We're there. We're now in a very strong position. I'm enjoying this campaign. And
do you want to be Prime Minister?
Yes, hang on, finish. Let me finish, please. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't wanting and prepared to take on this position and the consequences that flow from it in the general election that follows after that. This is a process not just about individuals, it's about redemocratising our party so policy comes in future, my suggestion, from the grassroots rather than an all-seeing, all-knowing leader at the top.
And finally, a very, very difficult question for you from Twitter. Phil Bryars tweeted to ask, do you accept responsibility for the hipster beard phenomenon? And if so, when are you going to apologise?
Oh, I can't apologise for my beard. It's too long-lasting. And besides, I'm very proud of my Beard of the Year awards in the Parliamentary Beard of the Year contest. And so if beards are on the growth, I'm sorry about the effect on the hairdressing industry.
Jeremy Corbyn, many thanks indeed for joining us today.